On the evening of June 9th, 1912, the town of Villisca, Iowa, was alive with the sounds of community. The small farming settlement had always been quiet, the kind of place where church bells marked the rhythm of life and children's laughter carried through the dusty streets. That night, the Presbyterian Church was filled with families gathered for the annual Children's Day program. Proud parents sat in pews while boys and girls, dressed in their Sunday best, recited verses, sang hymns, and performed little skits directed by none other than Sarah Moore. Sarah, a mother of 4, had poured herself into making the evening perfect. Her husband, Josiah Joe Moore, stood by her side, smiling as his children, Herman 11, Catherine 10, Boyd 7, and Paul 5, played their roles. The Moore family was well known in Villisca. Joe was successful, respected, though not without enemies. Years earlier, he had worked for Frank Jones, a prominent businessman, but left under bitter circumstances to start his own enterprise. That move had stirred tension, and rumors swirled about Joe's personal life as well. But inside the church that night, none of that mattered. Among the children who shined under the lantern lights were 2 young sisters, Lena, 12, and Ina Stillinger, 8. Friends of Catherine, they had joined the Moore family for the evening. Afterward, the girls asked if they might sleep over. Their parents, perhaps reluctant but persuaded by the moment, agreed. No one could have guessed that decision would change their family forever. By 9:30 p.m., the program ended. The Moores and the Stillinger sisters walked home together through the warm summer night. Gas lamps flickered on the street corners. Neighbors waved. Laughter echoed as the children skipped ahead, Sarah calling them back. The family reached their modest white home at the edge of town and stepped inside, the door shutting softly behind them. What they did not know was that someone else may have already been inside. Later evidence would suggest that the killer had entered earlier, perhaps while the family attended the church program. Cigarette butts found in the attic hinted that he had been hiding there, crouched in the suffocating dark, listening as the family returned, hearing the sounds of shoes kicked off, beds creak, and voices soften into whispers. He had waited, patient and silent, until every lamp was turned out and every body lay still. Shortly after midnight, he descended. The first blows fell on Josiah Moore. The axe, heavy and merciless, came down with such force it destroyed his face beyond recognition. Sarah stirred, but had no chance to react before she too was struck down. The killer then turned his attention to the children. One by one, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and little Paul were silenced in their sleep. The Stillinger girls were last. Ina likely never woke, but Lena's body told a different story. She seemed to have shifted, perhaps awakened by the noise, perhaps glimpsing the figure in the dark. Some reports suggested she had injuries that hinted at a struggle, and her night dress was pushed up, leading to speculation of an attempted assault. By dawn, 8 lives had been extinguished. The axe, which belonged to Josiah Moore, was left propped against a wall, still stained with blood. The killer, in a strange act, had covered mirrors and windows with cloths and items of clothing. Some believed this showed shame. Others thought it part of a ritual. Whatever the reason, it left the scene eerily muted, as if the house itself had been blinded. The next morning, neighbor Mary Peckham noticed the silence. The Moore household, usually bustling, was still. The chickens were restless, still cooped up. By 7 a.m., Mary knocked, but no one answered. By 8 a.m., uneasy, she called Ross Moore, Josiah's brother. Ross arrived, unlocked the door with a spare key, and stepped inside. What he saw upstairs made him stumble back out into the daylight, his face pale. "They're all dead," he whispered. Word spread like wildfire. Soon, half the town had descended on the house. Villisca had no police force of its own, and before authorities could secure the scene, dozens, eventually hundreds, of curious onlookers had trampled through the rooms. They peered at the bodies, touched the walls, even took fragments as morbid souvenirs. Whatever clues the killer had left behind were quickly destroyed by the crowd. The scale of the horror stunned the community. How could anyone have crept into that home, slaughtered a family, and vanished into the night? Who could commit such violence in a place so ordinary, so safe? suspicions quickly turned outward. One of the first names whispered was Frank Jones, the wealthy businessman and state senator who had once employed Josiah. Their falling out had been ugly, and rumors circulated that Josiah was having an affair with Jones's daughter-in-law. Could Jones have hired someone to exact revenge? It was plausible, though no evidence ever tied him directly to the crime. Another suspect soon drew attention: Reverend George Kelly, a traveling preacher known for odd behavior and a troubled mind. He had attended the Children's Day program that very night, watching the more children on stage. After the murders, he boarded a train and reportedly spoke of the crime before news had spread. Years later, he confessed under interrogation, but then recanted, his story riddled with inconsistencies. He was tried, but ultimately acquitted. Others believe the killer was a transient, a drifter passing through. Similar axe murders had occurred across the Midwest around the same time. Entire families had been slaughtered in their beds, the weapon often left behind, mirrors covered. Could Villisca have been part of a larger spree? The theory gained traction, but never resolution. The funerals were held together. Thousands attended, lining the streets as 8 coffins, 6 small ones, 2 larger, were carried into the church. The grief was palpable. Mothers sobbed openly. Fathers clenched their jaws, helpless before the enormity of loss. The Stillinger family, in particular, was broken. Their daughters had been meant to spend just one night away from home. One small decision, and now they were gone. The Moore house, once filled with laughter, became a symbol of dread. Families who moved in afterward never stayed long. Whispers of haunting spread, footsteps in empty rooms, children's cries in the night. Even today, the house remains preserved, drawing those who seek to feel the weight of its history. But the greatest haunting is not the alleged ghosts. It is the silence of justice denied. No one was ever convicted of the Villisca Axe Murders. Theories abound, suspects are debated, but the truth remains buried. The killer walked away that night, perhaps blending back into the town, perhaps disappearing into the horizon. Someone, somewhere, carried the knowledge of what they had done. Someone knew the weight of 8 stolen lives. And as the decades passed, the mystery only deepened. The Villisca Axe Murders became one of America's most notorious unsolved crimes, a chilling reminder that evil can thrive in the most ordinary of places. What makes the story endure is not just the brutality, but the setting. A small town where doors were left unlocked. A family returning from church. 2 young girls asking to stay the night. Innocent moments that should have meant nothing, but instead aligned into tragedy. The investigation into the Villisca murders was a tangle of chaos from the very beginning. The contamination of the crime scene had been catastrophic. Any footprints the killer might have left outside were trampled by curious onlookers. Fingerprints, if there had been any, were smudged or wiped away by people touching surfaces. The axe itself, propped against a wall and streaked with dried blood, was handled by multiple townsfolk before authorities could even begin their examination. By the time trained investigators arrived, what evidence remained was little more than fragments. Still, the brutality of the crime demanded answers. Local authorities, overwhelmed and ill-equipped, sought outside help. Detectives from larger cities, even private investigators, descended on Villisca. Theories multiplied. Some were grounded in logic. Others strayed into whispers of satanic rituals and madness. The covered mirrors and shrouded windows were interpreted as signs of shame, superstition, or an attempt to shield the killer from confronting the faces of the dead. Others speculated the act was deeply personal, meant to obliterate not just bodies but identities. Attention soon focused on men in Villisca who might have harbored grudges against Josiah Moore. The name that surfaced most persistently was Frank Jones, Josiah's former employer. Jones was not only a wealthy businessman, but also a respected Iowa state senator. Years before, Josiah had worked at his implement store, but the relationship soured when Josiah struck out on his own, taking a major account with him. This was more than a business rivalry. It was humiliation. The rumors only darkened when townsfolk whispered about Josiah's alleged involvement with Jones's daughter-in-law, a younger woman named Donna. Whether true or not, the suggestion alone was enough to cast suspicion. Could Frank Jones, a man of standing and reputation, have hired someone to take revenge? Some investigators believed so, even suggesting a known criminal, William Mansfield, had been paid to carry out the crime. Mansfield himself was later connected, at least circumstantially, to other axe murders across the Midwest. But no jury ever found enough evidence to convict. If Jones represented the respectable insider suspect, then Reverend George Kelly embodied the eerie, unsettling outsider. Kelly was a traveling preacher who had moved through Villisca in the weeks leading up to the murders. He was small, almost frail, with sharp features and restless eyes. Known for odd behavior, he often made townspeople uncomfortable. On the night of June 9th, Kelly had attended the Children's Day program at the church, sitting in the pews and watching the more children perform. After the murders, he boarded a train out of town in the early hours of the morning. Fellow passengers later claimed he spoke of the massacre before the news had even spread. Years later, Kelly would confess under interrogation. His words painted a chilling picture of compulsion, of being driven to kill. But just as quickly as he confessed, he recanted, claiming coercion. His mental instability made him an unreliable narrator of his own actions. He was tried for the murders in 1917. The first trial ended in a hung jury. The second brought acquittal. Kelly walked free, and though suspicion lingered, it was never enough to bind him legally to the crime. Meanwhile, newspapers across the country feasted on the story. Headlines screamed of the Villisca horror. Reporters descended on the small town, snapping photographs of the house, interviewing distraught neighbors, fanning the flames of speculation. Villisca, once anonymous, became infamous overnight. The tragedy of a murdered family was transformed into a national spectacle. Every rumor magnified until fact and fiction blurred. For the people of Villisca, the weight of that spectacle was crushing. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion. Friendships fractured under the pressure of whispered accusations. Parents kept their children close. Doors were locked for the first time, and the sense of safety that had once defined the town was shattered forever. The Moore family had been pillars of the community, active in the church, known for kindness. And if they could be annihilated in their sleep, then no one was safe. The grief of the Stillinger family was particularly agonizing. Lena and Ina had simply been guests that night, two little girls who had wanted to enjoy a sleepover with their friend Catherine. Their father lived with the regret of having agreed to let them stay. For years afterward, he would say that a single no could have saved them. But no father could have foreseen the darkness that crept into that house. That kind of guilt is corrosive, lingering long after the mourners go home and the coffins are buried. The funerals were held together, an unimaginable sight. 8 caskets lined up in the church, 6 small ones and 2 larger. Thousands came, some out of grief, others out of morbid curiosity. The air inside was suffocating with sorrow. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Fathers kept their hats in hand, their heads bowed low. Sarah's sister fainted during the service. Josiah's brother Ross, the man who had first discovered the bodies, could barely stand. It was said that the hymns sung that day trembled with the voices of a town forever scarred. As the years passed, suspects faded, evidence disappeared, and the case grew colder. Some believe the murders were part of a pattern. Across the Midwest in the early 1900s, families were found slaughtered in their beds, often with axes, often with strikingly similar details. Lamps left burning dimly, curtains drawn, mirrors covered, the weapon abandoned. In Ellsworth, Kansas, in Colorado Springs, in Monmouth, Illinois, and elsewhere, families have been killed in ways that echoed Villisca. Could it have been the work of a single transient killer, moving silently from town to town, leaving trails of blood and vanishing into the railways? The idea gained traction, especially with the suspicion surrounding William Mansfield, but definitive proof never surfaced. And so the house on East 2nd Street remained, a relic, a scar. Families moved in, but never stayed long. They complained of unease, of strange noises in the night, of a heaviness that made sleep difficult. Some claim to hear children's laughter echoing faintly, or footsteps pacing across empty rooms. Stories of haunting grew, turning the house into a magnet for curiosity seekers and later paranormal investigators. But beneath the ghost stories lies the harsher truth. The real haunting is not by spirits, but by questions left unanswered. Who was the man in the attic, if indeed he had hidden there? Did Josiah's business rivalry ignite a deadly feud, or did Reverend Kelly's twisted mind spill over in a murder? Was the killer a nameless drifter, vanishing into history, his secrets buried along the tracks of America's railways? No answer has ever come. More than a century later, the Villisca Axe Murders remain one of America's most infamous unsolved crimes. The house still stands, carefully preserved. Visitors walk its creaking floors, peer into the small bedrooms, and feel the weight of history pressing down on them. Some swear they sense the presence of the dead. Others come simply to confront the darkness of what humanity is capable of. What makes Villisca endure in our collective memory is not only the savagery of the act, but its setting. Evil did not strike on a battlefield, nor in the back alleys of a great city. It struck in the most ordinary of places, a small Iowa town, in a white frame house, against a family who had spent the evening in church. The horror lies in its familiarity. It could have been anyone, and in the end, perhaps the greatest terror is not in the blood that was spilled, nor in the specter of ghosts, but in the silence that remains. The killer walked away that night, unpunished, unknown. Somewhere, he carried the memory of 8 lives stolen, and we are left with a mystery that may never be solved, a reminder that evil often wears no face, leaves no trace, and sometimes slips into the shadows without ever looking back. More than a century later, the Villisca Axe Murders remain unsolved. Was it a jealous rival, a disturbed preacher, or a wandering serial killer who struck that night? What do you think? Who really committed the Villisca Axe Murders and why? Backend index pointing down, share your theory in the comments.